What you're about to hear is one of the most controversial and heart-wrenching cases that ever came before this judge. Case that tested not only the limits of the law, but the limits of human forgiveness. Before we begin today's story, don't forget to subscribe to Sweet Justice, where every courtroom story isn't just about the law, but about life, truth, and the human heart. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from, your country, your city, because justice belongs to everyone, everywhere. It started on a rainy Tuesday morning. The courtroom was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that only comes before something unforgettable. The judge adjusted his glasses, looked at the file in front of him, and read the charge aloud. Case number 417, registered nurse Claire Benson, accused of medical negligence resulting in death. The air shifted. A murmur rippled through the small crowd. Claire stood there in her faded blue uniform, her hair tied back neatly, her eyes hollow, not from arrogance, but from exhaustion. The prosecutor began, his voice sharp and accusing. "Your Honor." This woman stood by and watched a man die. She had the power, the knowledge, the duty to save him, and she chose not to. A gasp ran through the courtroom. But Claire didn't flinch. She didn't cry, didn't defend herself. She simply whispered, "He didn't deserve to live." Those words changed everything. From that moment, this wasn't just a case about life and death. It became a case about justice and revenge, mercy and memory, and a woman who would soon force the judge to face a question no law book could answer. Can justice exist? When the heart refuses to forgive, the rain hadn't stopped since dawn. Outside the courthouse, the gray sky hung low over the city, drenching the marble steps where people rushed under umbrellas. Inside, however, the air was heavy, still, like it was holding its breath. Judge Raymond Hale took his seat, his expression unreadable, his mind already turning the gears of another long day in pursuit of justice. But today felt different. Even before the gavel hit the desk, he could sense it, a tension that clung to the courtroom walls. He opened the case file. Claire Benson, the name read. June 34. Occupation, registered nurse, St. Mary's Hospital. Charge, medical negligence resulting in death. When Claire stepped forward, a hush fell over the spectators. Her uniform, though neatly pressed, seemed to carry the weight of countless sleepless nights. She wasn't cuffed. She had turned herself in voluntarily. Her calmness, her composure, unnerved everyone more than guilt ever could. The prosecutor, Mr. Dalton, stood tall and stern, his voice slicing through the silence. "Your Honor, the state will show that this woman, a nurse sworn to protect life, knowingly refused to save a dying man." He paced slowly before the bench, his polished shoes echoing across the marble floor. She had the training, the tools, and the time. Yet she chose inaction. The man's death was not an accident. It was a decision. The crowd whispered among themselves. A nurse refused to save someone. Unthinkable. But as their murmurs filled the room, Claire stood still, hands clasped in front of her, eyes lowered. Her attorney, a soft-spoken woman named Rebecca Moore, rose to her defense. "Your Honor, the defense acknowledges the tragic outcome of that night. But we must look deeper. Sometimes what appears to be negligence is something far more human and far more painful." Judge Hale's eyes shifted to Claire. Her face betrayed nothing. No tears, no defiance. Only a stillness, the kind that hides a storm. The prosecutor called his first witness, Dr. Alan Peters, the head physician at St. Mary's. A tall man with tired eyes. He adjusted his glasses as he took the stand. "Dr. Peters," Dalton began, "please describe what happened on the night of May 14th. "It was around 2:30 a.m., the doctor said, voice steady but reluctant. "An emergency call came in. A man was brought in with severe internal bleeding from a car accident. We rushed him into the trauma bay. Nurse Claire was assigned to assist." Dalton nodded. "And did she?" A pause. "At first, yes. She prepared the instruments, checked vitals. But when she looked at the patient's face, she froze." The courtroom leaned forward. "Froze?" Dalton repeated. "Yes, completely still. I told her to administer epinephrine. She didn't move. I shouted twice. She just stood there." "And what was the patient's condition?" "Critical. We needed every second. But she walked out of the room. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. She walked out. Dalton pressed. Yes, I had to call another nurse. We did everything we could, but... Dr. Peters's voice broke slightly. We lost him. Dalton turned sharply toward Claire. And who was that man, Dr. Peters? His name was Ethan Ward. The judge made a note. The name meant nothing to him, yet. But when Dalton asked his next question, something flickered across Claire's eyes. Did Nurse Benson know the victim personally? I believe she did, the doctor said quietly. Her reaction wasn't shock. It was recognition. Rebecca rose for cross-examination, her tone calm, deliberate. Dr. Peters, you said Nurse Benson froze. Is it possible that what you saw was a trauma response? It's possible. But in medicine, we're trained to act under pressure. True, Rebecca said. But even doctors are human, aren't they? The doctor hesitated. Yes, we are. Rebecca took a deep breath. Dr. Peters, do you know if Nurse Benson had any previous history with the victim? I don't know officially, but the look on her face told me there was something. Thank you, doctor. No further questions. As Dr. Peters stepped down, Claire's eyes met his briefly. There was no anger, only quiet resignation. Judge Hale leaned forward. Ms. Benson, he said softly, I will allow you to speak when the time comes. For now, please listen carefully to these proceedings. Every word matters, she nodded faintly. Yes, Your Honor. When the court recessed for lunch, whispers filled the corridors. People speculated wildly. Who was this Ethan Ward? A lover, a relative, a stranger? Claire sat alone on a wooden bench, her hands trembling slightly. Rebecca leaned beside her. Claire, we have to start preparing for your testimony. The prosecutor's painting you as a monster. Claire stared ahead. I'm not a monster. Then help me help you. Tell me what really happened that night. Why did you walk out? Claire's eyes glistened. Because if I had stayed, I would have killed him myself. Rebecca froze. What are you saying? But before Claire could answer, the bailiff's voice echoed. Court is back in session. She wiped her eyes and stood. Whatever her secret was, it was buried deep and she wasn't ready to let it out. Not yet. Dalton called the next witness. Officer Grant, the responding police officer at the hospital that night. He testified that Claire had confessed immediately after the patient's death. She said, I knew who he was. I couldn't save him. He didn't deserve it. Dalton turned to the judge. Your Honor, those words are not confusion. They are intent, Rebecca objected. Speculation, Your Honor. My client was in emotional shock. The judge allowed it, but his eyes lingered on Claire. I couldn't save him. He didn't deserve it. Those words echoed in his mind. As the witnesses rotated, a hospital aide, a janitor, a paramedic. One truth became clear. Claire's actions weren't a mistake of timing or panic. She chose not to act, but why? That was the question hanging in every corner of that room. The question no one could answer. Not yet. When the day's session ended, Judge Hale stayed behind, staring at the empty courtroom. He'd seen murderers, thieves, liars, but something about this case unsettled him. He opened Claire's file again. Tucked inside the back was a short note from the police investigation. Victim Ethan Ward. Prior criminal record, vehicular manslaughter, served 4 years, released 2017. The judge frowned. Vehicular manslaughter? He turned another page. A mention of a young girl, age 17, deceased in that same accident. Then he saw it. The girl's name. Emily Benson. His heart sank. He closed the file slowly. So that's what this was. Claire hadn't frozen because she didn't care. She froze because the man bleeding on that hospital bed was the one who had killed her sister. That night, the judge sat in his office long after the courthouse lights dimmed. He thought about Claire, a woman torn between her duty to heal and her pain that never healed. Tomorrow she would take the stand. Tomorrow the truth would come out. And by then, the courtroom would no longer be a place of judgment, but of revelation. The story was no longer about negligence. It was about whether a wounded soul can still deliver mercy, when mercy once destroyed her life. The next morning, the courthouse was silent again. But this time, it wasn't just curiosity filling the air. It was tension, the kind that sits heavy in your chest before something unforgettable happens. Judge Hale entered the courtroom, his eyes more tired than usual. He had barely slept. All night he kept replaying those two names, Ethan Ward and Emily Benson. If his assumption was true, then today would reveal more than anyone expected. He tapped the gavel once. Court is now in session. Claire Benson rose from her seat, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The faint tremble in her fingers betrayed the calm she tried to project. Her attorney, Rebecca, whispered, "Just breathe. Tell your truth." She nodded slightly. And for the first time since the trial began, she looked up at the judge. "Ms. Benson," Judge Hale said, "you may take the stand." She walked to the witness chair. Every step echoed through the courtroom. Every eye locked on her. Rebecca approached her softly. "Claire, can you tell the court what happened that night in your own words?" Claire took a deep breath. Her voice came out calm, steady, but it carried the weight of years of buried grief. "It was a quiet night in the emergency ward. We had 3 patients, 2 children with fevers and 1 elderly man with chest pain. Around 2:30 a.m., they brought him in, Ethan Ward. He'd been in a car accident. He was bleeding badly." She paused. "When I saw his face, I couldn't breathe. My legs gave out for a moment. I heard the monitors beeping, the doctor shouting orders, but everything around me went silent." Rebecca leaned closer. "Why, Claire? Why did you freeze?" Claire's eyes filled with tears she'd held back for too long. "Because I knew him. I knew exactly who he was. 7 years ago. That man killed my sister." The courtroom gasped. Even the judge's pen paused midair. Claire continued, her voice trembling now, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "My sister Emily was 17. She was walking home from her friend's house one evening. Ethan Ward was drunk, twice the legal limit. He hit her at an intersection and left her to die on the side of the road." She swallowed hard, her voice breaking. "He served only 4 years. 4 years for ending her life. My parents never recovered. My father drank himself to death. My mother hasn't spoken a full sentence since, and I went into nursing because I wanted to save lives. Because I couldn't save hers." The room fell silent. Even the prosecutor looked down at his notes, his expression softening for a moment. "So when you saw Ethan Ward that night?" Rebecca began gently. "It all came back," Claire whispered. "His face, his voice, the way he laughed during the trial years ago when he got his light sentence. He didn't even apologize. He destroyed my families and then moved on with his life. Did you intend to harm him?" She shook her head immediately. "No, I didn't want to hurt him. I just couldn't move. It was like my body refused to help. My hands wouldn't listen. For years I've saved strangers, done everything I could to protect people. But that night, the man I hated most in this world was dying right in front of me. And I froze." The prosecutor stood slowly, carefully. Even he seemed to feel the weight of the moment. "Ms. Benson," he began, his voice lower than before. "You've been a nurse for nearly a decade. You've dealt with trauma, death, and emergencies before. Why didn't you step aside and call someone else if you couldn't act?" Claire looked down. "I thought I could. I really did. But when I looked at him, I saw my sister's face. I saw her lying in the street bleeding. I saw her eyes, and then I wasn't in that hospital anymore. I was back in that moment. It's like time stopped. But you didn't tell anyone?" Dalton pressed gently. "No, I didn't even think. I just walked out." "And you admit that your inaction resulted in Ethan Ward's death?" "Yes," she said quietly. "I know it did." Dalton nodded, then turned to the judge. "Your Honor, while we all sympathize with Ms. Benson's pain, the law doesn't bend for emotion. She took an oath to save lives, all lives. What she did was not justice. It was vengeance through silence." Rebecca immediately rose. "Your Honor, this woman has carried her pain alone for years. That night she wasn't a nurse. She was a broken sister reliving her worst nightmare. She didn't choose to let him die. She was paralyzed by trauma. Punishing her won't heal anyone." The judge leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. He tapped his pen lightly, a habit everyone in his courtroom recognized as a sign he was deeply conflicted. The judge finally spoke. "Ms. Benson, when you left that room, did you know he would die?" Claire hesitated. "Yes, Your Honor. I knew. And when you walked out, what did you feel?" She stared into the distance, eyes wet. "Nothing. For the first time in years, I felt nothing at all. No anger, no sadness, no guilt. Just silence. But when I saw him die, when the monitors went flat, that silence turned into something worse. Shame. Because I realized I had become what I hated most. The judge nodded slowly, taking in every word. For the first time, he truly saw not a criminal, but a human being crushed under the weight of her own conscience. He cleared his throat. The court will adjourn until tomorrow morning. I want both counsels to submit their closing statements by then. The verdict will be delivered after. The gavel hit the desk, but no one moved. Not even Claire. That night, Rebecca walked Claire out of the courthouse under a gray sky. "You did well today," she said softly. "You told the truth?" Claire gave a tired smile. "The truth doesn't always set you free. Sometimes it just makes you remember why you were in chains in the first place." Rebecca stopped walking. "Claire, you saved hundreds of lives. Don't let one night erase that." Claire looked up at the sky, raindrops landing on her face. "Maybe this is my punishment. Maybe I was never meant to be forgiven." She turned away and walked toward the parking lot, her figure fading into the rain. Upstairs, Judge Hale stood by his window, watching her leave. He thought of the hundreds of verdicts he had given, some fair, some haunting. But this one touched something personal. He thought about his own daughter, around Emily's age when she died in that drunk driving case years ago. He had buried his anger in his work, but he never forgot the face of the boy who took her life. Now he found himself judging a woman who faced that same demon and failed to rise above it. He whispered to himself, "Would I have done any better?" As the courthouse lights flickered off and the rain finally stopped, a single thought echoed in Judge Hale's mind, a question that would shape the verdict to come. When pain and duty collide, which one defines justice? Tomorrow the world would find out. The rain had stopped by dawn, but the air still smelled of thunder. A pale gray light slipped through the courthouse windows as people slowly filled the seats again. Every whisper carried the same question. What will the judge decide? Judge Raymond Hale sat quietly at his bench, the same file open before him. He had read it again and again through the night, but the words didn't change. Nothing in the law books could tell him what was right. He looked up as the bailiff called the room to order. "All rise. Court is now in session." Claire entered slowly, her steps lighter than yesterday as if she had already accepted whatever would come. Her face looked drained yet peaceful. The prosecutor and her defense attorney took their places. The courtroom settled into a fragile silence. "Ms. Benson," Judge Hale began, his tone softer than usual, "before I give this court's verdict, I will allow you one last opportunity to speak." Claire rose. She clasped her trembling hands together and faced the judge directly. "Your Honor," she said quietly, "I know I broke my oath. I've lived my life trying to heal others, but that night I couldn't heal myself. I failed as a nurse and I failed as a human being. No matter what you decide, I've already sentenced myself every day since that night. But I want to be honest. For once, I didn't feel hatred. I felt emptiness. I thought watching him die would bring peace, but it didn't. It only reminded me how much of myself I lost with my sister." Her words cracked somewhere between sorrow and acceptance. "I don't expect forgiveness," she continued, "but I do hope. Maybe someday I'll be strong enough to forgive myself." She sat down, her eyes lowered. The prosecutor stood, speaking with uncharacteristic restraint. "Your Honor, the state recognizes the tragedy in this case. But if emotion outweighs duty, then the foundation of our justice system crumbles. We cannot let grief excuse negligence. A life was lost, and responsibility must follow." He turned and sat down slowly, no triumph in his voice, only fatigue. Rebecca Moore rose next, walking toward the bench. "Your Honor, justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about understanding what punishment already exists. My client has carried this burden for 7 years, and for the rest of her life, she will wake up knowing she failed at the very thing she lived for. That's not leniency. That's a lifelong sentence of remorse." She took a deep breath. "We ask the court for compassion, because sometimes mercy is the only verdict that can heal anyone." When she sat down, the courtroom was utterly silent. Even the clock on the back wall seemed to hold its tick. Judge Hale leaned back, eyes closed for a long moment. His hand hovered over the gavel, but he didn't move. He looked at Claire, then at the spectators. each of them waiting to see what kind of man sat behind that bench today, the judge of the law or the judge of the heart. He finally spoke. "When I was younger," he began, "I believed the law could fix everything. That rules were the same as justice. But the longer I sat in this chair, the more I learned that law and justice are sometimes strangers, who meet only by chance." He paused, his voice low but steady. "Ms. Benson, your actions were wrong. You violated your duty. A life was lost because of it. But this court cannot ignore the truth. You acted out of pain so deep it blinded your conscience. The man who died that night destroyed your family once, and in his final moment, he destroyed your peace." He closed the file gently. "Punishing you will not bring him back nor your sister. But letting you walk free without consequence would dishonor every patient who places their life in a nurse's hands." The courtroom hung on every word. The judge's gavel lowered slightly, then stopped. "Therefore," he said, "this court finds you guilty of professional negligence resulting in death, but suspends all custodial sentence. Instead, you will be required to surrender your nursing license for 1 year and serve 6 months of mandatory community medical service under the Department of Public Health." A wave of murmurs rolled through the crowd, half shock, half relief. The judge continued. "You will serve in clinics that treat victims of drunk driving accidents. The same pain you've lived with, you will now help to ease in others. This is not punishment. This is purpose. And perhaps through service you may rediscover the part of you that still believes in life." He set the gavel down softly. Verdict delivered. Claire stood frozen for a moment, tears finally breaking through the wall she had built. She whispered, "Thank you, Your Honor." The judge nodded, his eyes glistening behind his glasses. "Don't thank me, Ms. Benson. Thank the law that still allows mercy to exist." As she walked out of the courtroom, reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but she didn't respond. She just stepped into the sunlight that had finally pierced through the clouds. Rebecca caught up beside her. "It's over," she said softly. Claire shook her head, smiling faintly through her tears. "No, it's not. But maybe it's beginning again." Weeks later, Claire began her service at a small rehabilitation clinic outside the city. Her first patient was a teenage boy, trembling, broken, recovering from a crash caused by a drunk driver. He looked up at her and whispered, "Am I going to be okay?" Claire smiled gently, that quiet, compassionate smile she thought she'd lost forever. "Yes," she said softly, "you're going to live, and I'm going to make sure of it." Outside the window, the evening light poured across the room, golden and warm, the same color her sister loved. For the first time in years, she didn't feel empty. She didn't feel angry. She just felt human again. In the end, justice isn't about punishment. It's about understanding why we fall and giving us a way to rise again. Sometimes the hardest verdicts aren't written on paper. They're written on the heart. This was the story of the nurse who refused to save a man, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, compassion is the sweetest form of justice.